They told me the briefings would prepare me. 11 months at the diplomatic preparation cadre on Korath Station, 7 of them spent in immersive language protocol, 2 spent reading contact theory until my eyes ached. Nothing in any of it prepared me. For the moment I understood that the Cytheran Covenant had already been inside the ship for 6 hours before we knew they were there. I was 2 weeks into my first posting, junior attaché, 3rd tier, which meant I carried documents and kept quiet and watched how the senior staff held themselves in the presence of things they did not fully understand. Ian's Pale Doctrine was a diplomatic frigate, needle-hulled, barely armed, painted in the pale gray of neutral intent. She carried 2 cloaked escorts, Pale Warden and Kale's Margin, running silent on our flanks at a distance of 300 kilometers. The protocol had been agreed months before my posting began. A single neutral point in unmapped space, no weapons charged, crew manifests exchanged. The meeting to last no longer than 4 standard hours. That was the agreement. The Cytheran Covenant had signed it. They had not told us was that their concept of a boundary, the threshold between inside and outside, was not a concept they held in any form we would recognize. I was in Corridor 7 moving between the cipher room and the attaché suite, carrying a sealed packet of communication logs for the senior attaché when I stopped walking. I do not know exactly why I stopped. There was no sound, no light change, no sudden alteration in the recycled air. There was simply a quality to the space ahead of me that had not been there a moment before. A texture, almost. A density in the emptiness. And then the emptiness had a shape. And the shape had a presence. And the presence was aware of me. I have read every clinical description of a Cytheran fold manifestation, written in the 7 months since that day. None of them come close to what it was like. To stand in that corridor and understand that what was in front of me had not approached from any action. It had simply resolved. One moment the corridor was empty. The next it was occupied. I did not run. I will not claim that as courage. I want to be honest about this. Because these accounts matter and exaggeration serves no one. I did not run because my legs did not remember how to move. I stood, and the thing in the corridor stood, and we looked at each other in a way that the word looked does not adequately carry. The Cytheran do not have eyes. What they have instead is an attentiveness so complete and so physical in its presence that being the object of it feels like being read. Not scanned. Read. The way you read something you have been waiting a long time to understand. It communicated without language. I know how that sounds, and I am not going to soften it into metaphor. There was no telepathy, no signal I can point to on a recording. What I can tell you is that I was in the corridor, and the Cytheran was in the corridor, and at some point during the 61 seconds we occupied that space together, I knew with complete certainty what it had concluded about me, about us, about what the Pale Doctrine was. It had not expected us to be afraid. That was the thing. Across however many centuries it had spent observing, cataloging the behavior of species that moved through space on the principle of controlled explosion, species that built weapons first and asked questions somewhere distant after. It had understood fear as a variable. Every species that crossed the void carried fear in some form. The Covenant had accounted for it. What they had not accounted for was the particular quality of human fear, which is that we do not stop. We are afraid, and we hold the line anyway, and we do the job, and afterward we write it down, so the next person can be afraid in exactly the right way and still hold the line too. The Cytheran had reached into the Pale Doctrine not as an act of aggression, but as their version of a greeting, the way you might extend a hand. They had folded through our hull the same way they moved through the fabric of space itself, which, for them, is the only mode of transit that exists. In the 6 hours before we knew they were there, 3 of them had moved quietly through every compartment of the frigate, reading us, learning us. The cipher room, the engine bay, the briefing lounge where the senior attaché was running contact protocols with her team, unaware. The medical bay, crew mess, all of it. What they found, apparently, was not what they had built their models around. Senior Attaché Vale Oren brought me into her office 4 hours after I filed my corridor report. She was a precise woman not given to preamble, and she told me directly that the Covenant had issued a formal contact acceptance. Peace of a kind, an agreement to remain in communication, exchange envoys in the agreed format, to hold to the neutral point protocols going forward. She used the phrase asymmetric equilibrium, which I had learned in theory but had never heard deployed in a live contact resolution. It meant, we understand each other well enough to proceed, though not equally, and the imbalance is accepted by both parties. She also told me about Pale Warden. One of the Cetherin's fold passages had intersected with the escort. At the moment, Pale Warden's captain had powered her sensors to active, reacting to the fold signatures we were only then detecting. The intersection had not been hostile. The Cetherin had moved through, the fold had closed, and Pale Warden's crew, all 41 of them, were alive. They were also locked inside a sliver of time, approximately 0.03 of a second wide. Not dead, not harmed, as far as our instruments could determine. Simply unreachable, the way a photograph is unreachable. Present, fixed, unresponsive to anything you say to it. Pale Warden herself drifted at her last recorded heading, her running lights cycling at the wrong interval, hull responding to no hail. The rescue tender that reached her position 9 days later reported that the ship looked, from the outside, entirely intact, entirely normal, entirely like a ship whose crew was about to answer. Vale Oren used the phrase cost of contact. She said it the way a person says a thing they have rehearsed, to keep their voice from doing something else. The Covenant had expressed what their envoys characterized as regret. They had also been clear that the fold passage through Pale Warden was not retrievable by any process within their capability to offer. We came home. I filed 47 documents in the month that followed, contributing in my small and third-deer way to the contact archive that would define humanity's posture toward the Cetherin Covenant for the next generation. The peace held. 7 months, 1 week, and 4 days of silence from the Covenant, and then the relay station at Keth's margin, a small automated installation at the edge of mapped space, stopped transmitting. No distress signal, no debris field on subsequent survey. Simply gone. A different relay station 3 weeks later, then 2 more in the same month. Pattern analysis came back in 6 days. A Cetherin dissident faction, a clade within the Covenant that had opposed the contact decision, had concluded that the agreement was a mistake their leadership had made without sufficient mandate. They had not communicated this disagreement to us. They were communicating it now, in the language they were fluent in, which was the removal of things from the physical universe. No wreckage, no warning, no demands. Just absence, spreading quietly outward from the edges of our mapped space like water finding its own level. I sit in the briefing annex at Korath Station most mornings now, 1 rank higher than I was, and I draft the assessments that go up to people who make decisions I do not yet get to make. The peace still holds, formally. The Covenant's official channels are still open. The dissident clade is not the Covenant, and we are careful, in all of our language, to maintain that distinction. But Pale Warden drifts, and the relay stations are gone. Shit. And somewhere in the mathematics of what the Cetherin read in us, when they walked through our ship, there is a faction that did not find us admirable at all. What first contact cost us was never in the briefings. It was never going to be. Price of being seen, really seen for the first time, is that not everyone who looks at you is going to like what they find. We knew that before we crossed the void. We just hadn't run the numbers on what it would cost when something on the other side knew how to collect.